Welcome everyone to this new MLG video. We're here at River Church, one of the MLG churches, and we're just starting a new series of content to talk a bit about who we are, where we come from, why we're doing what we're doing. And MLG is a network, it's MissionLifeGrace, and I'm here with Tim Cross, who is the leader of the network, and with Paul, one of the founders of the network. And we're just going to talk a bit about our history, why we are MLG, why we're doing what we're doing. And so just give a bit of background. And just to start with, we all come from somewhere. I'm currently pastoring a church in Eltham. Tim, you're pastoring a church here at River. Paul was pastoring a church at River, in this building actually, Giggs Hill as well, and Worthing, and now retired, if there's such a thing. But we all actually come from the same background. So Paul, do you want to tell us a bit about our heritage?
Yes, we come from a historic group of churches that really came out of the charismatic movement in the 1970s. And we particularly, I suppose, there was a central figure called Mr. G.W. North, and he went round the churches, encouraged them. Lots of them, he had an input into their beginnings. And we were part of that and came out of that. We were from the church in Eltham. John's dad was the founder of that church, and we would come together before to an annual conference, which initially was in Derbyshire, but then moved to Devon, and we were all part of the group of churches that met in that conference and had a certain amount of fellowship together. And that's where we all came from. I personally was called out from the church in Eltham in 1994 to lead a United Reformed Church, which is where we are today, in the building where I was. And but I was very much on my own. It was a small, struggling church. And we eventually left there and started something fresh, which became the River Church. And but again, it was still quite small. I still felt on my own. My one other elder worked full time, so it was difficult to have fellowship in the week, if you like. And the rest of the church was mainly younger men and women. So I was looking for something for support, really, from a wider body. And the fellowships around Mr. North's ministry didn't really provide that. There was a sense they came together for preaching and particularly for the annual conference, but there wasn't anything really on a month-by-month basis, anything I could really tap into. And so we'd go to there were one or two elders' gatherings during the year, and I think it was on our way back from one of those. I was with John here and another guy, Rob Parks, who was at Worthing, and we started to talk about where we could get more support, because Rob was fairly isolated down in Worthing, and so out of that started to become the desire to meet together, perhaps just for lunch. Regularly.
I remember that conversation, because we were talking earlier about that conversation, and your dad's starting to forget it. So,
just my age.
But I remember it so clearly, because one of the things we were I'm sure we were travelling up to up to Warrington, and on a long journey, and we just enjoyed being with people, and we were just chatting. And I think it was, in my mind, the three of us were just chatting, and just that talking, having people to talk to that outside of your own situation, that knew how you felt, was really, really important. And so it's a great thing about the fellowships was that there were many churches, but they were quite across the country. So we actually started to look quite locally and thought, well, there's Worthing, there's Orpington, there's Eltham, and then there were some other churches like Epsom and that were sort of close by. And that became, we started then just saying, well, why don't we meet for lunch? And we just met in Crawley. And then the people around that started to grow, because I'm not too sure when you started coming, because just for the lunches. There was no network at this point, was there? It was just lunch, just
informal.
elders and leaders joining together for lunches.
Yeah.
When did you first?
I started coming along when I started working for the church in Eltham, I think. So that's when I had free time in the day. So I think I was an elder with you at Eltham, and I can't remember. Dad's very good at dates. I can never remember the dates of these things, but yeah,
Yes.
it would have been probably about 11 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
something like
I mean,
that.
I always bring this up because I do find it quite funny. But before MLG, which we talk about what MLG means, I always bring this up. So Tim was in the leadership team at Eltham, and we were talking about it. And we came up with like 242 or something, this name.
right,
and I
yeah.
took it to my leadership forum, as it was called, which Tim was a member of. And Tim was quite vocal that I don't really see why we need this. So it's always quite funny. I always bring it up because it's funny because now Tim is the...
It's always a brilliant idea when it's your own idea. that's the thing.
But yeah, so it was always in our mind. The difference, I think, between when it became just relational lunches was that there was a time when we thought, okay, this is great as elders, and part of that, and we still do it today at times, not so much the lunches for a while, but it's, again, just going back to the importance of having people that understand where you come from, because I don't know if you want to speak into this, Tim. When you're a leader, even if you've got elders or people around you, leadership is the loneliest role in the world in any kind of situation, and having other people that understand the frustrations or can share the joys or give in wisdom is so important, because you were involved in leadership prior to Eltham with gigs and that, but from your perspective, how has it helped shape your leadership, because you're now leading a church, obviously you're leading the network. How beneficial has that been?
I think what you realise is that friendship is just so vital to the human condition. And I don't think that changes when you become a leader. I think you need friends. But I think the problem is that as you become a leader, particularly in leaders of churches like ours, which are independent, kind of charismatic churches, there is a little bit sometimes of, not intentional, but sort of separation. You're the one that's ultimately responsible. You've got to take decisions. Sometimes you have to care for people. People open up and talk to you, and you can't necessarily share what someone's just told you with, anybody. It's kind of, and so what happens is that in leadership, you can kind of become a bit distant, I think, from your friends, not on purpose, but just because the role means that you're not necessarily able to be open in quite the same way. And so I think for me, what I suppose growing up here and watching Dad particularly, and then one or two other leaders of smaller churches kind of just be very isolated, I just think, like, what you need is friends. And you need people that just to come alongside you. And sometimes you don't need necessarily a great big person that's going to come in and, tell you, here are the 5 steps to sort your church out and to take you to the next level. Because as you know, 9 times out of 10 doesn't work, right? Yeah. But what you do realise is valuable over the long run is people you think, yeah, this guy's just my mate. He's just my friend. This lady, this couple, they've stood with me when I've struggled in my marriage, or they've stood with me when I've struggled when someone's criticising me in church. And over time, the currency, the value of that becomes...
And one of the standout moments, again, I don't know if you remember, Paul, because I don't know if you was around at that time. Well, we started doing the lunches, then we started doing retreats.
That's right,
down
for the elders.
Worthing in the house there. And one of the standout moments for me was when one of the leaders that was there, I won't mention their name, actually shared something, a real struggle, like I'm really struggling. And you probably remember, and it was, and we basically said the conversation there was, you've got to step down, you need to take some time out, and I'd never experienced that kind of openness and things like that. So that was, there was one, and just to mention, I know I might joke that Paul's the oldest here because we're so young, but there were other, like my dad was around in those days.
Yes.
And then you had...
He was older than me.
And he's older than you. But Les Wilden was around, and
Graham Klein,
Peter Jones, Graham Klein,
Graham Davis. Graham
Davis, yeah, a bit later on. Graham Davis came, but all these guys, and they were, again, for a younger leader, as you've been saying, just terribly important. But the retreats are really quite special, weren't they?
They are, yeah, and they always have been and still are to this day. We still meet once a year all together. And I think, that's a place where we've been open. We initially, those retreats were really a place where we can share what really, if there's something really bugging us, where we can really bring it and share it with others and feel that burden lifted. And it isn't just, remember the situation you're referring to, but there's been others.
Lots of others.
Where through the years, where maybe a church is really struggling, maybe to get off the ground, and we've been able to stand with the leader and really encourage them and pray for them. And I think that's been very helpful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I know personal times where I've been able to just be frustrated and let my frustration and my tears at times come out, because over the years we've created this environment that you can do that and you're not judged for it. And there are many other leaders involved with those retreats and things now, which is great. One of the things we then started to do is, like, this is great. We talked about leaders and how we're having a great time together, but our churches were still quite distinct. So we then started doing some like ad hoc meetings together. And I remember we were talking again about a meeting in Swanley, which was quite central.
Yes.
And we've done some others. And again, that was, I think, and I don't know what you think, Tim, but that's when I started to think, this is great for leaders. This is really challenging to get our churches together. Because for me, it was like, we're creating meetings, but how do we create a sense of togetherness from a church perspective? And I think that's when we started to think, and I might be getting these things in the wrong order, but at some point we started to think, I think this is great in an organic relational sense, but maybe we need to make some commitment to start thinking about organising ourselves and calling this a network. And but for me, it was, how do we get our churches together? Yeah. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that, Tim.
I think I suppose what was going through my mind as as we were kind of thinking this through together, way back when, was a lot based in our experience of being independent churches, and we traditionally were very independent churches, and that was always heralded as a great strength. But I think growing up, I sort of saw it as a great weakness, really, because when you're independent, that's wonderful. You've got autonomy to do whatever you want, brilliant. So when things are great, that's fine. But what happens for a church when leaders disagree with one another and fall out? What happens when the church begins to struggle and there's a lack of resources? What happens if there's a moral failure of a leader? What happens, when you want to get young leaders in, but you haven't got young leaders? And that was kind of, I moved to Elton, didn't I? Because really there was that relationship between the two of you. And you needed at that time a worship leader to come and help, because there was a guy called Mike and Lydia Jones that were leading worship, and they were moving to South Africa, and so you had basically a vacancy in that space. And again, it was just an example of like how, if it's just leaders having a nice time fellowshipping together, that's great, but there is this kind of next level that just as churches, if we can move, still retain autonomy but become part of a committed group, there's so much more value that we can add to one another and support for one another. And so, that was definitely starting to think through how we do that. And it's just, it's been an interesting journey, hasn't it? And
I think, just a couple of things from my point of view. I think something we felt keenly at that time was that younger leaders were not being encouraged in the fellowships, in that general fellowship scene we'd come from. We wanted to encourage, I believe, encouraging younger people to develop in ministry, and that wasn't available. So we were looking for a vehicle for that, a place where we could, people could get opportunity and be encouraged. And I think that was also very important. I think the other thing we thought was important and we felt was lacking was that there wasn't a sense where churches were being celebrated as bodies that God had raised up. There was a great sense of call to mission, particularly foreign mission, not so much fish mission in this country. And we felt the church needed to be celebrated. So we wanted to create something where churches would have an identity and be encouraged in their ministries, in their local ministries, and that all worked together. You know, the youth thing really came out of Tim was by that time running something called Passion for God, which was for young adults for those wider fellowships. And Tim was running that by this time, and so we really we thought of combining that, what was happening there, with the lunches and the support of ministry that we had been developing over a number of years by that time.
Because I think the Passion for God thing was, so I led that for 4 or 5 years after a couple, Pete and Libby Chamberlain, who'd done an amazing job, and they continue to be very supportive. But the problem is you do this great weekend and maybe a couple other events for these young adults, and you'd kind of encourage them to go on with the Lord and to really get involved. And at the time, we really wanted people to get into their calling and their ministry, and then they'd go home to their local churches, and they'd just get frustrated because there was no opportunity, there was no space. And I think it was interesting because I remember having a conversation with you about Passion for God. I don't know if you remember this. I remember phoning you up. This was before obviously I've known you for a really long time, but like we did sort of not been very close for for a long time.
Since you didn't invite me to your wedding, I think
that was. Still bitter about that, John, aren't you? Sorry about that. I feel so bad about that now, given how close we are now. But yeah, I remember phoning you up, and you at the time said to me, "I want to be really involved with the elders. I think I want to be committed to trying to help the elders." And I was kind of quite involved with the young adults. And in the end, what happened is those kind of two things kind of came together, didn't they, really? It was kind of, you realised that just working with the elders was kind of, had its limitations, and I realised that working with the young adults had its limitations, and really what we needed was those two things to kind of come together. And so I suppose that was the moment when my mind changed from like, okay, fine, to actually like, okay, we need to really see this as a whole thing.
I think that the thing that really made the difference for me, I think when we started talking about being a bit more organised, was because I take a lot of value growing up in the fellowships and the conference, and just knowing people and having Christian friends, and and then I'm now older, and we hadn't been going to the conference because part of it wasn't because we didn't agree. It was just it ceased to provide some of those things that were in our hearts, like home mission and things like that, and then churches just move on. So it's not a negative to the older conference, but we then started to realise, actually, you know what, there's things I'd love my kids to really enjoy. And now, when you jump forward 10 years, which we'll talk a little bit about the conference a bit later, but that is happening, particularly for my youngest, because he's the younger in them. But with the older two as well, they've been exposed to things that having this wider group of Christian friends, because depending on what church you're at, you may not have any friends, and I know just how powerful that was in my life, So that, in terms of seeing it from young leaders, young people, and that sort of like takes us on to that moment where we said, okay, let's do it. What should we call it? And we tried all sorts of things that didn't sound cheesy, that no one else could have, and then we came up with.
You came up with
it.
It was, and I'll take the blame. We came up with, but I remember I said, look, why don't we just call it what are 3 of our key values: mission, life, new life in the Spirit, grace, because we come from a holiness movement, and that was a leveling word, as opposed to we're not going to be in holiness anymore, but it was more just really wanting to and so and then you said, well, we'll end up calling it MLG anyway. So which is what we do. Rarely do we say Mission Life Grace, it's MLG, but so we started the conference, and we just had our 10th year, and again, Tim, you've had a big involvement in that. How would you sort of say, okay, for you? So for me, I'm thinking this is great because I'm thinking about my kids and all this kind of thing. But in terms of our churches, what would you say has been the impact on the churches that have been going? And some have dropped off because of just changes, the way that things change. But particularly of the churches that have been present, how would you say that's impacted?
I think the impact has been significant, but probably in ways that you might not be obvious. Because in some ways, being part of the MLG network isn't, doesn't mean a huge amount in some ways, right? It's not like suddenly there's all of these MLG events that you've got to go to. We don't charge people loads of money. We're not providing loads of additional services. But I think I'd say firstly, it's kept a lot of churches going that I think would have not kept going. I think of several where I think if it hadn't have been for the support and the encouragement that we provided to the leaders and that sort of stuff, I think that, to be honest, several of those churches may well have given up. I think there's been points of conflict and friction where, as is very normal, as I've realised, is that leaders do, elderships and leaderships do have moments where there are tense moments. And MLG's often been quite involved in those moments. I think that's been critical for helping navigate through that process. I think kind of in terms of that, it's been positive. I think what it's also been good for is it's been good for broadening the churches. So I think if I think about us, I think about how much I've learned from you, like particularly from you, and I think about Matt Chilvers, and I think about two very different people. But I've learned, I think our church has been influenced by your perspective and so what it does, it broadens you, because I think what happens, we all do, we tend to narrow, don't we, on the things that we think are important and I think what happens if you're not careful, you end up with quite narrow churches that are kind of quite focused around whatever it is the leader particularly kind of is thinking about. But I think I don't know if you feel this, but I really appreciate the influence and the impact that some other people have had on me and therefore my church, but also not just me personally, but when you're at a conference and you've got a certain type of ministry, it shapes you and changes you. I think our worship style has changed because of MLG. I think some of the things that you've talked about worship over the years, and like, for example, Matt's emphasis on things like praise and singing have been really helpful for the local church here in terms of the way that we've changed what we do. And just even really practically, like talking about, broadening, like lots of the new songs we've sung over the last few years as a church have come because someone else in the MLG network says, I'm singing this song, it's really good. And you're like, oh, that is really good, let's copy that, So, I mean, I think it's been a strengthening influence over the years, and I think it's been a broadening influence over the years. I think where we'd like to see it go is to see it even more in an equipping space. I think we've always wanted, haven't we, have this heart to equip people.
You mean
more.
As a conference or as a network?
As a network. We've wanted to equip people more, haven't we, and do that. And so I think we've strengthened, we've broadened one another, we've encouraged one another. But actually, I think the challenge for us as we move forward, and we're thinking about this already, isn't it? How do we equip one another to go forward?
Just before we move off of the conference, because one of the things I think, you mentioned Matt Chilvers, because the Chester Church came on board a little bit later on. Which was because I remember going to, he's not here to speak for himself, and they just weren't ready. Yeah. And then they started coming along, and it is like, for me, it is like having another ingredient in the mix.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like the flavour changes when you get other and I think one thing that's, I think, again, because we are at the heart relational, we have, we're not, very structured in a very hard way. And there are some real benefits for that, as there are some challenges. But when we do see other churches come in, they do add that flavour, and so again, that's a highlight for me of MLG when Chester came on board, because now they're, obviously Matt's very much involved in the leadership at MLG. But is there any final thoughts about the conference from your end, Paul?
Well, I think what has been really good is for the youth and children's work,
which has grown phenomenally. Really,
it is. It's probably a third of the conference is probably young people and children. Is it?
Probably.
Would you say? And I think that's what we want to do in the future is see those young people not just have a good time at a conference and then go off and do their thing in life, but let them really own the conference as their conference, and they will start contributing positively and grow into leadership from that conference. And I think that is one of the real goals of MLG, and has been a blessing that the youth and children's work is continuing to bless and to encourage many young people and children.
Yeah. And so going on to some of the other things that we do. So we did the Equip course, which was the leadership training course a while ago, which was I thought was really good. I mean, the content was fantastic.
Yeah.
And one of our sort of core, I call it a core strength, is that we do like to really get ordinary people involved in things and taking from what we've got. But at the same time, we do invite in from outside, and we've got some great friends to the network and great ministry that we've had. But so we've had the Equip training. Of course, we've done some more locally. We've done some more theology, kind of particularly in a couple of churches. And we've had weekends that the ladies had more sort of geared towards the ladies. And what other things have we done? Have I got them all there?
What?
So we've done things outside the conference that we do.
Well, things outside the conference. Obviously, we've
got a leadership.
The leadership retreats we do. We've done some leadership conference. We've got a leadership conference at the time of this recording.
That's for anyone involved in leadership as opposed to
obviously there's the youth weekends, ladies weekends. We've done I think obviously we've done podcasts and things like that. Interestingly, it's good that we're restarting these podcasts. I think people have often find these things quite helpful actually. I know, when we were doing our leadership podcast, leading at a local level, there was a lot of people that would kind of give me feedback, which I was really appreciated, so
and part of why we're doing this is to say, sort of emphasise what it is we're doing, communicate a bit more. Cause
we've done worship leader training as well. We've done worship leader training. We've done some worship leader training weekends, worship weekends, that kind of stuff. We've done a lot of local events, haven't we, as well? So we've done down in Devon, we did an evening. We've got a guy called Dave Powell come and speak, and we've done events here, haven't we, that have kind of had a joint meetings and things like that together. So it's and that not what I think you also realise is that after a while, lots of people become friends with other people from other churches, and we've noticed, like again, as the network's gone on, people have moved churches, but they've often moved to another MLG church. Like there was a couple, Steve and Anna, that went down, from Eltham down to Devon to Heathfield. A couple from us, Aaron and Miriam, went from down here to Heathfield. Some people came from Eltham over to River Church from Eltham, and so it's just and that's helpful, because I think people feel like there is an identity, there is something about MLG that is really valuable, and it's valuable that they want to stick within it. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's definitely more than just some events. It actually becomes a big family. I think it's. I suppose for me, when I, talking about our history, I always kind of grew up, I suppose, feeling like I was part of, and I don't know if this is a good word or not, but it was almost like being part of a tribe, right? You were part of a tribe, and then you had your own individual family, your church family within the tribe, but you were part of a bigger nation, if you will. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like, again, I'm over spiritual, a bit about Israel, and you had your 12 tribes, and then you had within your tribes your individual families. And
when we talk about our distinctives, don't we? Like I think we have shared distinctives that, again, I think a lot of that is influenced by a lot of the churches have a shared history. But I think they're distinctives that don't require that shared history.
Absolutely not.
So, and we, part of, our desire is to be available to other churches that don't have a tribe.
Definitely,
and we are, and again,
because that's the point, right? Is that you want to, this sense of identity is not just it's me and my church, is I'm part of something bigger, and I think that's the point. I valued that so much that I wanted that to be available to others, and we want the tribe to grow, right, and expand, and you want to feel like you're part of something, because if you're just on your own, it can be really difficult. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I mean, that says exactly what I was thinking. It's that sense of if there are people who, and you can go on the website and find out about our values and things like that. But what we're talking about here is that the why behind MLG, I think, has always been that we just found such value of being together and supported as leaders, and now we're seeing that in the churches, where we're seeing relationships and friendships, and being able to see other churches supported from people in the church, because there's been support at eldership level. We've all been involved in some kind of conversation to help other churches. But when you see it at the membership level, you think, that's what we're talking about. And again, the conference is very good. It's quite visible about that, but it happens outside of that. So what would you say, Paul, in terms of from your perspective, just in reflection of that history, what would you say is maybe the highlight, or something that you'd love to see the network growing as it goes forward? This is our kind of coming into a close.
Right.
Thoughts?
I think that I'd like to see more churches involved, have a wider, where the blessing that we've known can be expanded. I'd like to see us send people out. I mean, I went to Worthing from River, really from one MLG church to another, and to take on the church there when Rob, that was leading it, wanted to go abroad. So there was that sense of I was sent out from River to support another MLG church, but also to support the new works developing, new churches springing up. So I'd like to see that sense that we become a sending network, as well as a network that's encouraging one another. So I think that's important. I'd like to see the young people, already said, develop into leadership, and I'd like to see revival. But that's what we all want.
Yeah.
And and really a Holy Spirit move that would facilitate a lot of these things I've been talking about. I think that's really where I want to go.
Yeah. What about you, Tim?
I think there's practical things. It'd be great to have some more churches. 'Cause I think again broadens us. I think it adds to the flavour, to the mix, like you said. But I think I've kept this band on, right, from the conference this year, which I never normally do. You know, like the day you get home and you want to take it off. But it says on it word and spirit, and because that was the theme of our conference this year. And I think, you know, I want to see a network of churches that are really committed to the word and moving in the power of the spirit. And I've kept it on there to just keep reminding myself, like, you know, the way that you do. It's like, this is what we're about. We're about word and spirit. And you know, that will have its expression in a whole range of different ways, you know. But, you know, the church, you know, our churches desperately need, you know, the word of God, you know, in a kind of era when, you know, truth is being kind of undermined. You know, can we be a people that continue to really teach the truth well? You know, we've often talked about, you know, there's a book that we often refer to by Glyn Harrison called Better Story, which is really about how can we tell the truth but in a better way? How can we teach the Bible but in a better way than just, you know, boring, dry? You know, the word's fantastic, but doing everything in the power of the Spirit, and we need the power of the Spirit. So for me, that's got to be our trajectory, right? It's got to be our focus. We want to see churches that, you know, are powerful in the Word and powerful in the Spirit. And I think if you see that, I think and really, I'd love to see more people getting saved. I mean, in the end, that's what we exist, right? And it was interesting. We haven't really covered this, but we talked about MissionLifeGrace. But the big reason I think we came together or certainly in my mind, was that, you know, you touched on it earlier, Dad, about the fact that there was lots of, you know, broad mission, but it's like we've always, haven't we, been committed to local mission. We want to see people in our streets, in our communities get saved. And that's why we're called MissionLifeGrace, because we want mission to be the centre, the focus of our attention. We want to encourage one another to keep going in mission. And so, yeah, where do we move forward? Hopefully we're Word and Spirit churches who are just sold out for the lost, really, trying to see people get saved. And I think, you know, one of the things one of my favourite moments, I think we all agree, is often when we have these conferences and you hear testimonies of somebody, like there's a lady called Julie in Heathfield, or some of the guys here, like, you know, we've got in River Church someone like Sonny that gets saved, or you know, Jimmy. We've got other people, you know, you hear their stories, think, yeah, this is what we're about. Just want to encourage one another to keep doing that, you know. And yeah, sorry, I stopped talking.
Yeah, no, I mean, my reflections are the same in that sense. I think I certainly, what kind of lands in my head when I ask this question is just the real value of learning from other churches.
Absolutely.
That I think, you know, if we were to say, do we need any more churches? But you know what? If I can learn something more from someone else, and have a story to tell that can encourage someone else,
absolutely,
and that encourages that leader or those leaders or that church, I'm like, yeah, that's the. You know, we're not interested in the numbers game.
No.
But we are. What we've seen so far is we've been learning, and each church, even now, is going through something that turns into a lesson that they can give to someone else.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I think that was it. So, I think that's a good summary of our history. And it all started in the car.
The car.
Paul doesn't remember. I think he was driving, Paul. That was why.
Oh, probably. Yeah.
But
that was my
it's-
age.
I'm lucky you made it back to start the network.
But yeah, it's been about whatever, I think from that time, a good 13 years maybe, I don't know. But
Well, that was about, I reckon that would have been about 2008,
Yeah.
something like that.
yeah,
Because I think Rob came back in about 2008.
yeah.
It'd be about that 2007
Yeah,
maybe.
and it's been a joy, and so but I think that just sort of wraps it up.
It's fantastic.
Look out for
you.
some more videos and that we're going to get going, and also on our websites and blog posts. We're just going to try and get a bit of momentum. And if anyone's watching who's interested in joining MLG, you can put a message to Tim via the website, and he will talk to you. But that's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.